In a previous video, I talked about how using basic story structure can really bring your nonfiction book to life. Today, I want to walk you through a nonfiction book that does that really well. That book is Born to Run, A Hidden Tribe, Superathletes, and the Greatest Race the World Has Never Seen by Christopher McDougall. Not only does McDougall use the 4 C's of basic story structure, concept, conflict, characters, and causality, he also uses a plethora of other fiction techniques to bring his story to life, to engage his readers, and to get his message across. Born to Run is centered around an interesting concept, filled with conflict, centered around an eclectic cast of characters, and has solid causality. All of these things come together to make it really interesting and to make it something readers tell their friends about. For those interested in running a good story or writing nonfiction that reads like fiction, read Born to Run. This is Ignited Writing, a channel dedicated to helping writers like you transform your writing so it lingers with readers, because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. Let's begin with in media res, beginning with action. In media res means you're starting in the middle of a scene and is a common fiction technique. When done well, it pulls a reader into a story and piques their curiosity. The reader wants to know what's happening, who these people are, and why they're here. Born to Run begins with, for days I'd been searching Mexico's Sierra Madre for the phantom known as Cabello Blanco, the white horse. I'd finally arrived at the end of the trail in the last place I expected to find him, not deep in the wilderness he was said to haunt, but in the dim lobby of an old hotel on the edge of a dusty desert town. This beginning passage makes the reader wonder why McDougall was searching for this person. What was he doing here? Why did he need to find this person? It also doesn't start at the beginning, at what started McDougall on this journey. Instead, it starts in a really interesting moment that captures a reader's attention and makes them want to know how McDougall got there. So you don't have to start at the beginning. Often, it's better not to. It's better to start somewhere that really hooks your reader and grabs their attention so they're paying attention when you do get to the beginning. Next, let's talk about concept. Why does my foot hurt? The first C of basic story structure is concept, and McDougall's concept was really simple. It was, why does my foot hurt? And that single question led him all the way to an ultramarathon. This concept is clear on the book jacket and at the beginning of the 2nd chapter. In chapter 2, McDougall lets the reader know what the climax will be so that they're invested and really want to get there to see what happens. He says, in the end, I got my answer, but only after I found myself in the middle of the greatest race the world would never see, the ultimate fighting competition of foot races, an underground showdown pitting some of the best ultra-distance runners of our time against the best ultra runners of all time, in a 50-mile race on hidden trails only Tarahumara feet had ever touched. The whole rest of the book builds upon this. It's all about running super long distances and what the human body is really capable of. And it all started with one question. Why does my foot hurt? Notice that the concept of the story is different from the message. The concept of why does my foot hurt is not the message. McDougall does answer that question, and that answer is the message. If the book started with the answer to why does my foot hurt, why would readers keep reading? This is why you need an interesting concept to hook them and not necessarily use your message as that hook. Next, let's talk about conflict. Man versus self, nature, and man. McDougall doesn't shy away from conflict or invent it in Born to Run. Instead, he lets the natural conflict of competition drive his story. There are many different types of conflict here. There's the conflict of man versus self. McDougall's foot hurts. His major conflict is trying to overcome and understand this pain. There's also the conflict of being in a race. It's you competing against someone else. You're trying to beat that other person. And then there's the conflict of you versus Mother Nature. The runner versus the terrain, the storm. Many of the conflict of the characters in this book is internal. They're trying to run faster, longer, and farther than they ever have. Regardless of what the other people are doing, they want to beat their best time. Each chapter in Born to Run contains at least one of these major conflicts. That's key to a nonfiction book that reads like a story. You can't have one conflict that only appears in one chapter. That's not a story. If you want it to read like fiction, you need there to be conflict in every chapter. McDougall uses these conflicts to show his experiences with running and the knowledge he gained by studying it. Instead of just telling people what he learned, he's showing them what he learned and why it's important and why they should remember it. Because of this, he is more likely to influence his readers. Let's move on to characters. People are fascinated with people. Whether intentionally or not, Born to Run shows how different, quirky, and interesting people can be. McDougall describes the cast of characters in the lines: "Soon I was dealing with a murder, drug gorillas, and a one-armed man with a cream cheese cup strapped to his head. I met a beautiful blonde forest ranger who slipped out of her clothes and found salvation by running naked in the Idaho forests, and a young surfer babe in pigtails who ran straight toward her death in the desert. A talented young runner would die, and I stumbled across the barefoot Batman, naked guy, Kalahari Bushman, the toenail amputee, and ultimately the ancient tribe of the Tarahumara." These people and more populate the pages of Born to Run and are a major part of why this book is so successful and interesting, because people are fascinating. Their interactions with McDougall are what transformed this book from a list of things that happened to McDougall to an interesting story with a great cast of characters. Just because a book is nonfiction doesn't mean it doesn't have characters. Each person you introduce in your nonfiction book should feel real. It's not enough to say that they were real. Readers have to come to believe in them, in the way that they come to believe in fiction characters. I do want to note that writing nonfiction means you might have to get permission to mention certain people, especially if they're still alive. There are ways around that, like changing names and descriptions and that sort of a thing. I highly recommend that you seek legal counsel, hire someone to help you go over the people you're mentioning in your book, whether or not you're legally allowed to call them out by name, and what you can do if you're not. Most of the memoirists and nonfiction writers I know have done this, and they recommend that everybody else does too. Next, let's talk about causality, from foot pain to an ultramarathon. Causality is the cause and effect relationship between events. It's how you got from point A to point B and why those two things are directly related. Without this connection between events, a story becomes a list, not a story. While Born to Run is not told in chronological order, it still has causality. We begin with McDougall in the desert, and we're wondering how he got there and why. Then we transition to why he went on this quest that led him to the desert. Then we skip ahead, then we skip around some more. So just because your book has causality doesn't mean it has to be in chronological order. Sometimes it's more entertaining if you tell a story out of order. As an editor, causality is something I often discuss with memoirists. Just because something happened during the time that your book focuses on doesn't mean it necessarily belongs in your book. If you're writing a memoir about a specific theme or event, you don't need to include everything that happened during that time. You should only be including the things that are important for that theme or that experience. Sometimes those other stories that you want to put in there because they happened at the same time don't belong in your book. They're better used as a promotional story or as a part of a different book. When I'm recommending this, it's because of causality, because these events have nothing to do with the other events. They're not directly related, other than that they happen to the same person around the same time. That's not a strong enough relationship for it to be included in your story. I'd like to leave you with an editor's thoughts on Born to Run by Christopher McDougall. I am personally a runner, but not an ultramarathoner, so this book naturally appealed to me because of this. But regardless of whether you run, bike, swim, it's very important that you do exercise. Most of my story ideas, especially the ones that helped me get out of a jam in my story, came while I was on a walk or a run. There's something about that rhythmic body motion and being outside that frees my mind and allows it to wander and be open to new ideas. This is something I've heard from many other writers. They find the best remedy for writer's block is a 15-minute walk. If you want to be the best writer you can be, it's essential that you take care of your physical, mental, and writing health. And a part of that is movement. You don't have to go for a 10-mile run or anything like that. You can just do that 15-minute walk. But going on that walk and making it a daily activity is going to be key to feeding your creativity. If you're writing nonfiction, I highly recommend you use the 4 C's of basic story structure like Christopher McDougall does. You need a good, solid concept. You need conflict, characters, and causality. Also, don't be afraid to use other fiction techniques. Christopher McDougall used in media res. He started in the middle of action. These techniques have been proven to be interesting, to engage readers, to make them want to know more. So why not use them in your nonfiction book? What other fiction techniques did you see in Born to Run? Share them in the comments below. And for more videos like this that tease out the techniques writers are using in successful books so you can use them too, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping writers like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. To find out more about me, go to www.ignitedinkwriting.com. There you will also find a list of books that I highly recommend writers explore to help them improve their writing. And now it's your turn. How can you use action, interesting characters, conflict, and other fiction techniques to ignite your ink?